I'm proud to say that Spectrum Telecom now employs over 100 employees throughout our 5 branches in Northern Ontario, of which 20% of those are immigrants. And this number is growing every day thanks to programs like RNIP. We take great pride in having the opportunity to create jobs not just for our communities, but for those choosing to make Sudbury and Northern Ontario their home. I want to recognize that today's announcement is the result of us all coming together as a community to improve the quality of life here in Sudbury. The Chamber of Commerce and its board and its members, our mayor and his team, our MPs, Marc and Viviane, have all supported the RNIP program and should be commended for their efforts. With that, I would like to now introduce the Honourable Marc Serré, MP for Nickel Belt and Parliamentary Secretary, to the podium. Thank you.
Oh, I gotta lower that mic, Jeff. Thanks, Jeff, for hosting us today. I want to make sure thank your team and also, you know, had the honor to work with Eric, the previous owner, and a lot of the work that Spectrum has done here in the community over the last, well, Eric was part of the telecom in the 70s here to build the internet all across Northern Ontario, and obviously can't be here without mentioning our good friend Jason Bionda that passed away just recently, and for all the work that you do with your team to ensure that we get connected in Northern Ontario, which is very important. Un gros merci de tout le monde ici. Je vais commencer, I'm just going to start off by that we're on the territory of the Atikameksheng and Anishinaabe and Wenipeti, so the Huron-Robinson unceded territory of 1850. And we had the honor last year to be with Minister Miller with the signing of the treaty that was 173 years. And at that time, Minister Miller mentioned when there's a gave the example, there's a past due book of 170 years, that bill could be a bit high. But that's where the resources that we share with the area here, with our First Nations, is so important. Alors pour moi, évidemment, d'être ici aujourd'hui avec ma collègue Viviane Lapointe, la championne de Sudbury, comme députée, une autre belle annonce que nous allons faire aujourd'hui avec le ministre. C'est toujours un plaisir ici de regarder le Grand Sudbury et le Nord Ontario quand on travaille ensemble. Évidemment, avec le maire Paul Lefebvre aussi, notre ancien collègue député de Sudbury avant. On a travaillé fort ensemble, je vais mentionner un peu tantôt. Puis aussi, I'm really happy to have Minister Miller here. I know he's from Montreal, so the big city, but he really understands rural. He really understands the importance of growing the country and getting the communities involved. So I know you're from Montreal. We don't hold it against you or Toronto, but we're really happy that you're here supporting Northern Ontario, supporting rural Canada all across the country. And I just want to say just quickly a little story. When I first was elected in 2015, immigration was very negative. My Facebook, the conversations that we had in the office, constituents emailing the office saying, oh my God, we can't bring in newcomers, we can't bring in immigration, they're stealing our jobs, they're taking away, and it was the number one negative response I would get in social media is immigration. And then we had Deb at the chamber with the members, and Jeff is the board chair of the chamber. And Deb came to us, Paul and I, talk about what she was hearing, and we were hearing the same thing from businesses. We need workers. We need skilled workers. We need more people to come and grow and build Northern Ontario. And that's where, at the time, Paul and I, we met with all the mayors in Northern Ontario with the leadership of the chamber, and even the mayors. Think about this. In 2016, the mayors of North Bay, Sudbury, Timmins, Thunder Bay, the Sault Ste. Marie were afraid to come out publicly to say that we need of the backlash. And look at today. So what they did, the mayors? They did a press release. We need immigration. The chamber, all the 6 chambers or the 5 chambers did the same thing. We took that information with the caucus in Northern Ontario. We took that information, we brought it to Ottawa, and then we've been working with the minister's office and to get the rural immigration pilot project started, because we based it on the Atlantic immigration pilot project. There was so it's really, you know, I'm you know, from From a perspective of community support, I just want to, the last point here, just really thank the Chamber, thank you all for supporting the development of the program. And the city of Sudbury, all the staff that were involved made this happen. And it's not just because we heard, because the data shows the importance of having immigration, newcomers here to build our cities. And from Carpenters Union to many different locals, they really need people. So, je veux juste dire que c'est vraiment important. Donc, on parle du rural, mais on a aussi entendu l'importance des maires puis des communautés d'affaires, l'importance au niveau des francophones. Comment important que c'était. Puis là, on avait développé le programme au niveau de la francophonie, mais là, je suis vraiment... c'est vraiment un honneur pour moi, parce que là, on va... je parle pas d'annonce, là, parce que je vais juste parler de l'historique. On va parler de l'historique, comment important que c'est le rural, puis la ruralité dans le Nord Ontario. Puis là, le ministre est ici aujourd'hui pour nous faire une annonce vraiment spéciale. Pour regarder comment on avance l'économie, comment on avance nos générations, comment on avance pour faire certain qu'on travaille tout ensemble pour faire un meilleur accord. Alors, it's my pleasure to invite Minister Miller to make the announcement today for the programs that we'll be announcing today. Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Merci infiniment, Marc, Jeff. Thanks so much for the introduction. And you're right, I'm not from a rural area. I'm from downtown Montreal. Thank you for reminding me that. When I got into politics, I thought North was Montreal North. So it's been a learning experience. And in fact, in the roles that I've had as Minister of Indigenous Affairs in two portfolios, as the Prime Secretary for Infrastructure, and now in this role as Minister of Immigration, I've probably been to a lot more northern communities and rural communities than a lot of my colleagues. Just the privilege to meet people and really discover my country is an enormous one, and help contribute to these beautiful parts of our country and making them better, stronger, more resilient, more jobs, and more a reflection of who we are as a country. It's been a really awesome opportunity, and I wouldn't have gotten that by staying in the law firm that I was at in downtown Montreal. But that's enough about me. Je veux d'abord vous remercier infiniment. Merci d'avoir reconnu et d'avoir fait la reconnaissance territoriale des Anishinaabe, Atikameksheng et de Wanapité. Heureux d'être accompagné évidemment avec Viviane, qui travaille si fort pour les gens d'ici. Et évidemment Paul, mon ancien collègue, qui travaille à la mairie. Et son équipe, je vous remercie, puis merci de l'accueil si chaleureux. It's great to be in the nickel capital of the world. And they told me not to say 5 cents. It was a horrible faux pas, but nickel rings off the tongue a hell of a lot better. And obviously, this is an amazing area. You just guys came back from a conference on the mining sector, but it is important to remind people how it drives the Canadian economy, several parts of the world's economy, and employs, I think, over 5,400 people in this in the greater Sudbury area. I mean, Paul, you can correct me, but des communautés comme Sudbury sont vraiment l'épine dorsale de notre pays, fournissent une grande partie de la nourriture, de l'eau, l'énergie dont les Canadiens ont besoin. Des communautés comme ça soutiennent des industries qui contribuent à la prospérité de notre pays. Toutes ces communautés qui sont semblables emploient presque 2,6 millions de Canadiens et produisent à peu près 25% du PIB, les communautés rurales. Alors, il faut non seulement le reconnaître, mais il faut être reconnaissant. It is, however, the fact that remote and northern communities face unique challenges in response to Canada's aging population, the labor market shortages, and as such, it's critical for these communities to attract the skilled workers that you need, such as healthcare professionals, workers, construction workers, people here. 20% of your workforce is not nothing, Jeff, and I think it's important to make sure those people feel validated, welcome, as they become Canadians, and as fellow Canadians welcome them. They're supporting our economies, paying taxes, making sure we're the country that we expect ourselves to live up to be. C'est évidemment la raison pour laquelle on s'engage à relever ces défis comme gouvernement, à trouver des travailleurs qualifiés dont les économies ont besoin pour prospérer. En 2019, Immigration, réfugiés, citoyenneté de Canada, le ministère que je gère, a lancé un programme pilote qui visait à stimuler la vitalité économique et démographique des petites communautés. The Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot aims to achieve this goal through immigration, but specifically by creating a pathway to permanent residence to attract and retain skilled foreign workers in this region, so you're not leaving people in limbo. The pilot has two main objectives, obviously to stimulate economic development in smaller rural communities and help them keep newcomers that they attract. And we know that there is retention challenges, whether you're an immigrant or not. There is the lure of larger urban centers. We were just talking about that before. Through the pilot, it's important to highlight its success, and it's really thanks to you. We've partnered directly with 11 communities across Northern Ontario in Western Canada, including Sudbury. Chaque communauté participante a identifié ses besoins en main-d'œuvre par l'intermédiaire de son organisation locale de développement économique et nous a indiqué les domaines dans lesquels elles avaient le plus besoin de travailleurs. Les candidats qualifiés pour occuper ces postes et qui voulaient vivre dans l'une de ces 11 communautés pouvaient alors utiliser le programme pour obtenir la résidence permanente. Ce programme était la recette du succès pour les nouveaux arrivants, un emploi, une communauté accueillante et des services pour les aider à s'installer dans leur nouveau foyer au Canada, on pense que c'est facile, ça ne l'est pas nécessairement. As of the end of January, 5,158 newcomers became permanent resident through this pathway, and roughly 87% of those who were surveyed and responded were still in these communities as of October of 2022, which is really big if I look at the national statistics. And you're clapping for yourselves, really, because it's you guys that have done it, and that agency. You know, the story of the big federal government deciding who comes into the country and then people that come here take a generation to figure out. That isn't how it should be. It's often been the case too often, and this is an example of how the agency that you take and take responsibility for those people is very important as part of the integration process, because obviously we can't do it alone. And those odds that I mentioned, 87%, and they actually defy sort of the it's lack of a better word, the depopulation odds in rural communities in a lot of ways. So these people, they're not only here, they love it and they want to stay and they want to contribute to build it. So this addresses the labor shortages in healthcare, manufacturing, retail accommodation and food services, as well as scientific and technical services. So last month, due to the ongoing interest and the advocacy of many parts of the country, my department extended the pilot's community recommendation period that was set to expire on February 29th. It made a lot of sense. We also increased the number of candidates that communities can recommend, which is key. These measures will allow participating communities to take part in the pilot for a longer period and help fill the labor needs with skilled candidates. J'ai le plaisir d'annoncer que le Canada s'appuie sur cette réussite pour soutenir davantage les petites et les moyennes communautés. And given the successes of what we call RNIP, the Royal Northern Indigenous, I'm talking about my, I said it this morning, and the immigration pilot, and the critical role that it has to play in ensuring the growth of local northern economies. Given that interest, given the advocacy, I'm here to confirm that IRCC will make this program permanent. You guys are still clapping for yourselves, but I'll take it. It'll help ensure that Sudbury and communities like yours will be able to benefit from this program for the years to come. I must say that the work we still need to finalize it. There's some elements of this program that will take a few more months to make permanent. So part of the announcement today is announcing a new pilot, which is essentially RNIP. Just because this is a very nerdy part of the press conference, but because of my statutory powers, I can only do a pilot for 5 years, and so we're doing a new one that reproduces this and actually expands it to more communities while we make it permanent. And I think there's some elements as we refine what we've learned from the pilot that we need to fix with host communities, with the role of the federal government. We want to make sure that the need, the desire attaches with it some responsibility. And I think these are larger conversations that have to do with provinces and have to do with the importance of every community that says they want people to make sure that there's a responsibility that comes with it, whether you're talking about a university or a province or a city or a smaller town. It's part of the responsibility we all have as Canadians to make sure that we're all doing our jobs properly. So this is really something that technically it'll be launched this fall, and that'll be called the Rural Immigration Pilot, and the Francophone Community Immigration Pilot, which is why my speech is so long today, because we're actually launching 2 pilots today. I sound like a salesman, 2 for the price of 1. But this is actually a really important component because it has the capacity of doubling the number of people that come to this community, especially if they're speaking French and want to be part of those communities. The Rural Community Immigration Pilot will continue the important work to retain the talented foreign workers that you all know contributed to Sudbury. The new pilot is tailored to help us achieve greater alignment as to what I was speaking about just a few seconds ago. En consultation avec les communautés francophones, le programme pilote d'immigration dans les communautés francophones appuiera la vitalité des communautés francophones en situation minoritaire hors Québec. Un mandat très important pour mon ministère et notre gouvernement. En aidant ces communautés à attirer et à retenir des nouveaux arrivants d'expression française grâce à l'immigration économique régionale, le programme pilote s'aligne sur la nouvelle politique en matière d'immigration francophone de mon ministère que j'ai lancé il y a une couple de semaines. De nouvelles communautés francophones s'ajouteront aux programmes d'immigration régionaux dans lesquels les employeurs et les communautés joueront un rôle important dans la sélection de nouveaux arrivants pour leur région. Nous continuerons évidemment à travailler en consultation avec tous les partenaires pour rétablir et même augmenter le poids démographique des francophones de notre pays. This spring, we'll open the applications process for communities interested in participating in either pilot, and will then select the communities who will take part in these new pilots. Le nombre définitif de communautés qui participent à ce sera déterminé après un processus de demande, mais nous prévoyons plus de communautés que nous avions pour le programme pilote d'immigration dans les régions rurales du Nord. De plus, les communautés qui participent au programme pilote d'immigration dans les communautés francophones joueront un rôle actif dans l'attraction, la sélection et la rétention des nouveaux arrivants francophones, et évidemment même bilingues. As we make the rural and northern immigration pilot permanent, communities who took place in RNIP will have the opportunity to reapply to one of these pilots, and no reason to believe they won't be the successful candidates. Everyone just has to go through the process. But I'm confident that this new pilot, an enhanced version, will be one that will be able to meet the labor needs and grow communities. Today's announcement is a step towards establishing more permanent support for economic migration to rural and remote communities across Canada, it's critical to your long-term economic prosperity. At its core, this is about ensuring that rural and remote communities have the talented, skilled workers that they need to help grow their economies. Alors que nous continuons de poursuivre nos efforts de relever les défis nationaux qui sont liés au vieillissement de la population et aux pénuries de main-d'œuvre, les programmes d'immigration régionaux comme celui-ci produisent d'excellents résultats et jouent un rôle essentiel pour assurer la prospérité économique du pays à long terme. Cela est évident lorsque nous témoignons l'histoire de la réussite ici ou de Carrière Industrial Supply, un fournisseur de fabriquement d'équipements miniers fondé ici à Sudbury en 1964. Alors que leur entreprise continuait de croître, celle-ci, comme beaucoup d'autres, s'est trouvée confrontée à une pénurie de travailleurs qualifiés pour répondre à ses besoins de production. And after multiple attempts to recruit experienced local tradespeople, this family-owned welding shop opted to look abroad. And since hiring senior welders from Mexico, Carrier Industrial Supply has now grown exponentially, broken into new markets, and developed even better products. And as the skilled workers who have arrived work in places like Carrier and others, they're excited to land here, welcoming communities where they can build life that is full and complete for their families. And really look forward to visiting more communities, and I will be in Sault Ste. Marie tomorrow to see the work that they're doing. Hope that's not a rival statement, but there's work to be done around the country, and as we expand these programs, provide agencies to your communities, making sure that the federal government is doing its role and making sure that you have the tools you need, and also the people, particularly in communities that have strong French-speaking communities. This is something I think we can all be proud of, and with this announcement today, we have the potential of doubling the number of people that you'll be able to welcome according to the parameters of the program. So congratulations to everyone. Je vous félicite infiniment. Et merci. I think Viviane or Paul. Merci.
This mic's got to go back down. Bon matin tout le monde. Hello. C'est un plaisir d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui. Et Ministre Miller, je tiens avec mon collègue Marc Serré de vous remercier pour la bonne nouvelle aujourd'hui. Making RNIP permanent is of great import to our community. I'm going to focus my comments on the importance of public policy. And public policy is exactly that. It is policy that is led by, dirigé par le public. And I really want to acknowledge the Chamber of Commerce, Debbie and the board, for their advocacy around RNIP. Since I can't go back to 2015, Marc, but I know since being MP in 2021, every minister that we've brought to Sudbury and that has met with the Chamber, the very first item the Chamber tables with ministers is, when are you going to make RNIP permanent? They represent the businesses that are their members. They understand clearly the needs. They have sent letters. They have talked to ministers. They've talked to the MPs. And most recently, they were successful at a national level at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce to have a motion passed on RNIP and sent that off to our federal government. And it is through that advocacy, I will tell you, that enables our jobs as MPs. When we speak with the minister, they are aware. We go there and the shirt sleeves are already rolled up. They understand the needs and the significance of this immigration pilot program for our community. So I want to thank Debbie and your team, as well as the board of the Chamber, for the advocacy that you've done. This is very much an accomplishment of yours as well. So thank you. The City of Sudbury has done an outstanding job in managing this program, and I could tell you that every year, each and every year that RNIP was introduced, they doubled the numbers to the point where now that they've maxed those numbers, and I'm sure, Paul, when you come up here, you'll probably be asking for the cap to be even made greater. So I thank everyone. This is a wonderful day, and Paul, I invite you to the podium to say a few words as well.
Merci beaucoup, Viviane. Ministre Miller, bienvenue encore une fois ici. Grand plaisir de te recevoir. And a few echoes of what Viviane and Marc said. So thank you, Debbie, certainly to the Chamber and all the advocacy. You recall when we first discussed this a number of years ago, as we were contemplating what we can do certainly to ensure the jobs that were going unfilled, right? And we don't want those jobs to leave Northern Ontario, certainly not to leave Sudbury, and how we make sure that they were filled. And at the same time, we were certainly contemplating what can we do certainly as a community to continue this advocacy. And when I certainly look at what has been accomplished and where we are today, it's, as Mr. Miller said, we're clapping for ourselves, but at the same time, Mr. Miller, you need to realize the advocacy that it took, and certainly for you and your ministry and your previous immigration ministers that believed in the program, and now that's certainly making it permanent. It's quite. When I reflect, certainly on a number of years of how we got here, right, and what we've accomplished, and the needs that we have. I just came back, as you mentioned, we just came back for the big mining conference. One of the major issues that we're hearing is we need to find people to fill these jobs. And we're in a very unique situation. The critical minerals, la filière des minéraux critiques, très important pour le nord de l'Ontario, comme pour le Canada. Mais en même temps, on a une opportunité. Mais si on n'a pas les travailleurs pour remplir ces positions-là, ça va être très difficile de continuer. And as I always say in my speeches when I talk about mining, Sudbury is very unique. We have 9 operating mines within the city itself, 2 smelters, 2 refineries, 2 mills, as well as now, with just north of us, 2 hours north of us, the largest the gold mine in Canada is being built. Actually, we'll be pouring the first gold bar, and in about 5 years from now, it'll become the largest gold mine in Canada. 5 hours north of us is the Detour mine, that is one of the largest gold mines in Canada. And on the west side, the northwest side in Malartic, another one of the largest gold mines. But we need people to fill those jobs. And this program, the RNIP program, will help us certainly fill those jobs. And now the fact that we make it permanent, and as Viviane said, we're at around 500 spots that we have here. On a environ 500 places ici dans la ville du Grand Sudbury. On pourrait les remplir. On les remplit facilement. On demande pour un autre 500. Donc, we asked for another 500 positions. I wanted to at least 1,000 positions. And I'm really curious, the more details, très curieux pour la filiale francophone. Comment que, si que tu me dis qu'on a doublé ça, est-ce qu'on a 500 en ce moment, puis un autre 500 pour les francophones? Ça serait idéal, puis là, on pourrait doubler ça encore une fois. C'est ça la vision, parce qu'on a besoin du monde. Puis, en tout cas, c'est le plan de grandir le nord de l'Ontario, grandir la ville du Grand Sudbury, growth in the city of Greater Sudbury. I have a plan to get to 200,000, but I can't do it alone. The province and certainly the federal government has a key role to play. So again, merci, merci, merci infiniment. Thank you so much for coming here for this great news announcement. Viviane, Marc, thank you for your Canadian advocacy. Merci tellement. On a hâte de qu'est-ce qui va s'en venir prochainement, mais Québec, on va rendre ça permanent et remplir ces positions and all the jobs that this will create for us here in Greater Sudbury. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
We will now move on to our question and answer session with the media. I will be the moderator for the Q&A session. Il me fait plaisir de modérer la séance de questions et de réponses. Participation in the question and answer period of this event is for accredited members of the media. La participation à la partie questions et réponses de cet événement est réservée aux membres accrédités des médias. J'aimerais également souhaiter la bienvenue à ceux et celles qui se sont joints à nous par téléphone. Welcome to those who have joined on the phone. You are invited to ask questions in the language of your choice. Please state your name and media outlet. You are allowed to ask one question and one follow-up question. Si vous avez des questions, veuillez les poser dans la langue officielle de votre choix. Vous avez le droit de poser une question et une de suivi.
Bonjour, Monsieur le ministre. Bienvenue, Sénégal, Radio-Canada.
Allez-y. On vous entendait, mais...
Bienvenue, Sengad, Radio-Canada. Vous annoncez que le programme pilote d'immigration rurale et du Nord va être rendu permanent. Vous avez dit surtout en anglais qu'il y a des choses qui restent à clarifier avant donc de le rendre effectivement permanent. Est-ce que vous pouvez le dire en français, expliquer ce qui reste à clarifier? Et vous l'avez entendu justement, il y a des gens qui, dans le nord de l'Ontario, trouvent que ça a eu tellement de succès qu'ils veulent plus de place. Est-ce qu'il y aura plus de place pour le nord de l'Ontario?
Ben, deux choses. Oui, le programme va être permanent. Côté technique, j'ai l'autorité statutaire limitée à des projets pilotes de 5 ans avec des limites de 2750 personnes. Alors, je dois renouveler et puis ensuite faire ça permanent. Ça prend quelques ajustements suite à la rétroaction puis l'expérience qu'on a eue du projet pilote qui avait, oui, ses bénéfices très efficaces. Vous avez entendu le maire lui-même le dire. Il reste quand même qu'à travers le projet, on veut clarifier certaines choses au niveau politique, c'est-à-dire qui a la responsabilité de sélectionner, dans quels emplois. Est-ce que c'est la responsabilité de sélectionner des individus en particulier ou vraiment la responsabilité de sélectionner des emplois, des secteurs où les gens devraient être dirigés, puis la volonté de se diriger dans certaines zones. Alors, c'est des choses très techniques, mais ça reste des choses qui sont très importantes pour s'assurer que le taux de réussite et de rétention dépasse le 87 %. Pour vous donner un échéancier, et puis évidemment, il y a des choses qui peuvent arriver, j'irais de 12 à 18 mois pour vraiment rendre le programme permanent. Et donc, ça va se faire. Entre-temps, il va y avoir un nouveau projet pilote qui va venir, pour toute fin pratique, continuer ce qui arrive déjà. Et ça va être très important, évidemment, parce que c'était un programme qui tirait à sa fin. Pour le volet francophone, et là, on rajoute encore 2750 places possibles pour des communautés francophones accueillantes en dehors du Québec, bien évidemment. Et ça, évidemment, Sudbury serait un candidat idéal. Alors ça, c'est nouveau, d'où le fait que j'ai dit qu'il y avait le potentiel de doubler la mise. Mais c'est clair qu'il y a beaucoup de demandes dans beaucoup de communautés. Mais avec ces demandes vient une responsabilité qui ne relève pas nécessairement du fédéral. Alors, c'est un peu ça où on veut raffiner un peu notre façon de faire les choses, évidemment, pour s'assurer que ce taux de rétention soit plus efficace, surtout avec les gens qui parlent français, étant donné la fragilité de la langue en dehors, surtout en dehors, à l'intérieur du Québec, bien évidemment, mais surtout à l'extérieur du Québec.
L'autre question, c'est une question de nos collègues du national, puis j'aimerais une réponse dans les deux langues. C'est au sujet de l'aide qui sera rétablie pour l'Agence de l'ONU pour les réfugiés palestiniens. Les conservateurs accusent le gouvernement de financer une organisation qui kidnappe et viole des civils. Qu'est-ce que vous répondez à ça?
Ben, de un, je crois qu'il faut attendre le résultat de l'enquête, à savoir quel a été le rôle de certains employés d'UNRWA dans les événements du 7 octobre, évidemment dans leur militantisme extrême parfois. Je ne pense pas en même temps qu'il faut par extension dire que UNRWA est une entité terroriste. Je pense que les conservateurs jouent, comme ils jouaient en 2015, comme le mentionnait mon collègue, un jeu très, très, très dangereux de stigmatiser les populations musulmanes. Mais évidemment, il y a des comptes à rendre quand il y a des allégations de la sorte. Évidemment, le rétablissement du financement, c'est à suivre. Évidemment, je vous dirigerai vers le ministre de l'Aide internationale pour ces réponses, mais d'abord et avant tout, avant de reprendre le financement, il va falloir avoir des réponses, puis une certitude que ces fonds sont acheminés, l'appui est acheminé à une agence qui nous a rendu des comptes. I guess the same thing in English. The alleged employees that have participated or supported the events of October 7th and the massacre of Jews is something for which they need to be held for account. You cannot at the same time necessarily conclude that UNRWA is a terrorist organization, as Pierre Poilievre has suggested. I think he is playing a very dangerous line of stigmatizing Muslims generally. That's a game that they have played in the past, and him in particular is notorious for having played that game. I think everyone knows what that smells like. But at the same time, we need answers as a government before reestablishing funding, and I think that's something that the Minister of International Aid is attempting to get, and for considerations about the timing of that, of any further funding announcement, it's really up to the Minister of International Aid to answer for.
Hello, Minister Ian Campbell from CTV Northern Ontario. I'd like you to respond to something Mayor Lefebvre was alluding to. Just how do you see your role and the role of your ministry in assisting other levels of government in welcoming these new immigrants to our community? I'm thinking in particular capacity, infrastructure, along those lines.
Yeah, it's a critical role, Ian, and I think it is becoming increasingly a debate in our society about, fueled by, I think, headwinds generally in a lot of countries, and our closest trading partner, our closest friend in the U.S. is not immune to that. In fact, it is an epicenter of a lot of these debates. Winds that are blowing against immigration, and Canada has built this tacit, implicit consensus that immigration is a good thing. I think absolutely is. If you hear all the testimony here today from Paul or Viviane or Marc, it's been a huge boon for Sudbury. It can't be the answer to everything, absolutely. And the criticism that Canadians level towards us, rightly, I think, at sometimes, is that we have not been as coordinated in making sure that this has been a success story. And I think we've gotten a bit lazy as a country in taking for granted the fact that immigration will just happen and people will integrate overnight. And often it's taken a generation for people sacrificing their own potential, their own skills, their own careers for that of their children. That's the story of Canada. But it isn't something, I think, that we can necessarily take for granted anymore. And I think that is why the role that I have is capital in this, but it doesn't come without the role and responsibilities of cities, of industry, of local groups, of provinces in particular that have that shared jurisdiction and making sure that that integration is successful. You can't come to me as the federal government and say, we want more this, more that, and the other, and then when something goes wrong, turn around and blame the government. That doesn't make sense. It's not the way the game's played. You have to have some agency, you have to have some responsibility, and responsible host cities like Sudbury have done an exceptionally good job of welcoming people, of making sure that they are well surrounded, well supported, and have contributed to the thriving of these communities. That comes with challenges, but we're not here to take up sort of all the easy lobs thrown at us as government officials. We have to deal with some of the hard stuff, and there are hard realities. The affordability challenge that Canadians are facing, I wouldn't put that on the backs of immigrants. The interest rates weren't caused by rises, were not caused by immigrants, but certainly as we see volume coming into the country, and if it does not look coordinated, it obviously lends itself to that criticism that is often leveled when it comes to immigration. And I think sort of newcomers are often the first people to pay the price for these arguments. And I think that's something I want to avoid as a Canadian for the future of my kids and my grandkids for that matter. So that is something that we can't minimize at the same time some of these challenges that we are seeing across Europe, in America, and think that magically this is not going to happen in Canada. But I think responsible governments need to be up to the challenge.
And I was wondering if you could respond to comments, criticism, or concerns about your recent cap on international students. I'm thinking the financial stability of some post-secondary schools. One of our post-secondary schools is just trying to find some financial stability after emerging from creditor protection, and how you see that unfolding with some smaller universities here in Ontario.
Yeah, and I'll admit quite openly that the measures we took, measures I've took throughout the fall, but particularly in the end of January, were essentially pretty rough measures. We were seeing just a huge expansion of international students coming into the country, 1 million on a 3-year, let's say a 3-year visa, jumping up to potentially 1.4 million next year if we hadn't sort of turned the taps off. And that's scary because we don't have levels in our permanent immigration plans to accommodate all these people. So we were in the process of creating our own homegrown asylum crisis through institutions that were issuing application letter or offer letters, and there being no sort of control over that. There's a reason for that. It's no surprise, particularly in Ontario, that there has been consistent post-secondary underfunding by provinces, which is their responsibility, as well as a failure to regulate a number of the designated learning institutions that the province accredits and has done so over time in a pretty much unbridled fashion. There's auditor generals have highlighted that. It is not about a political dynamic or political play, it's just a fact. And it's created this huge number of international students. Designated learning institutions are not stupid. They have been smart. They know that they can charge people 4 to 5 times the rates that my own kids are paying in university, and they've leveraged that. Don't necessarily blame the responsible institutions for having done that in the face of that underfunding. But all these financial issues that post-secondary institutions face can't be fixed on the backs of a poor educational environment offered to international students who are often entertained, who often have been provided false hope in their host countries. So this is about reforming a system and kind of, I would say, adjusting the course of a pretty big ship. And if we do it too roughly, it has the potential of creating a lot of problems. We're willing to work with institutions that are responsible. They already have, but they really should reach out and continue to reach out to my department. But there's some work to be done with the provincial governments to make sure that they are doing their jobs and making sure that the students that they welcome into their provinces and the institutions that they regulate are actually doing it in a way that's responsible. And that's something I've undertaken to do with the province of Ontario. They've given me assurances. Now we're just waiting for the results. Aussi long. Non, c'est correct. En fait, ce qu'on demande aux provinces, c'est dans l'optique d'un programme de visas internationaux qui a vraiment explosé ces dernières années. On est à 1 million d'étudiants, plus ou moins, avec le potentiel d'accroissement qui se situait à peu près à 1,4 million l'année prochaine et plus l'année d'après, on faisait face potentiellement à notre propre crise interne de demandeurs d'asile si on regarde les demandeurs d'asile qui sortent de ces institutions. C'est pas, j'enlève rien à personne qui demande de l'asile dans un pays comme le Canada, mais c'est bizarre, vous allez m'admettre une telle personne puisse demander l'asile après avoir fait un diplôme d'études postsecondaires dans une institution canadienne. Ça n'a pas de bon sens. Les gens qui viennent ici ont en théorie des dizaines de milliers de dollars pour venir étudier au Canada dans des institutions de réputation internationale. Et après ce parcours, n'ayant pas pu avoir un travail, un boulot ou même accéder à la résidence permanente, demandent l'asile. Il y a il y a un problème avec le système dans ce cas-là. Puis, dans le cadre d'un programme international géré par le gouvernement fédéral pour essayer d'attirer des gens, et on fait compétition avec plusieurs de nos partenaires économiques, plusieurs autres pays, on se devrait d'aller chercher les meilleurs étudiants avec les ressources financières pour pouvoir s'épanouir ici, contribuer au Canada ou même rentrer chez eux puis contribuer à l'essor et à l'épanouissement de leur propre pays. Or, ce n'était pas le cas avec le profil qu'on avait et le nombre de gens qui venaient simplement pour avoir une expérience qui n'était pas à la hauteur de leurs attentes. Et si on ne rectifiait pas le tir au fédéral, on aurait eu ce problème que je vous avais décrit. Or, c'est une juridiction qui est partagée, l'éducation étant du ressort provincial. Il y avait certaines provinces, entre autres l'Ontario, qui ne faisaient pas leur travail, c'est-à-dire de bien réglementer ces institutions, de bien s'assurer que ces institutions donnaient un parcours éducationnel à la hauteur des attentes des personnes qui avaient payé parfois 3, 4, 5 fois ce que mes propres enfants payent à l'université. Alors, il y avait une certaine injustice. Le coup de barre que j'ai donné en fin de janvier est quand même... c'est pas de la chirurgie fine, hein. C'était quand même 2, 3 coups de marteau. Il y a du travail à faire avec les provinces. J'ai la main tendue à l'Ontario, mais à toutes les autres provinces pour s'assurer qu'on puisse avoir un système éducationnel dans la mesure où elle attire des étudiants à l'international à la hauteur des attentes qu'on se fait comme Canadiens, nos institutions postsecondaires, mais aussi à la hauteur des attentes que se font les étudiants qui se font attirer ici pour 3-4 fois le prix qu'on paye normalement.
Hi, Tyler Clark from Sudbury.com. The issue of housing stock, like the vacancy rate in Sudbury is only around 1.7% at the moment. I mean, it's an issue tied to immigration insofar as more people, you need more housing. What more can the federal government do to support municipalities such as Sudbury, because they can't do it on their own? What more should the federal government do to complement the housing stock with this program being made permanent?
Yeah, well, I think, as you've seen, linking immigration to housing is a game of volume and often correlation. My colleague Sean Fraser has been spending the good part of the last 6 months making sure that we are engaging with municipalities to make sure that and municipalities are also taking responsibility on issues such as densification, providing funding for building. We have a huge challenge as a country in increasing the housing supply. It's something the federal government has a role in playing, and that is something that I think you'll see as part of the next budgetary cycle. I think you've seen it in the past 8 years. Has it been enough? Certainly not. Again, this is the first government in 30 years to have put as much money into housing than any other federal government, but it isn't an opportunity, for example, for provinces to go and clean their balance sheets at the same time. There is a role of provinces to play in making sure that supply is increased. I mean, cities come to us when they know that the responsibility is technically provincial, but we have a role to play as well. And so I think that is something that will continue for the next couple of years. There has just been an independent report that is, I would think, one of its kind that came out, put together by industry experts, as to how the federal government can work with other levels of jurisdiction to make sure we are championing housing and really meeting the housing needs by 2030. It is a tall task, but the interesting thing about it is it's multifaceted. It shows the complexity of the challenge, and it shows, and I would point you to that to read it, because it does show the complexity of how housing takes different forms and has different levels of challenge to it as we as a government continue to put dollars and put effort into making sure that things get built. I just did a tour in my own riding of downtown Montreal, where the occupancy rates are quite similar. The challenges in downtown Montreal, for example, are that it's not necessarily the vacancy rates, but it's actually the affordability of the ones that are out there on the market. And so is there work to be doing and to be done by the federal government and provinces, in particular municipalities, in looking at the way Airbnb works to reduce that affordability? I think that's an element that we can work on, and that doesn't necessarily require the construction of new houses, not to say that that's not needed, but there are elements in that report that I would point you to, because it's very important, and it's important roadmap to what can be done over the next few years.
And with the RNIP being a pilot program so far, and another pilot program is going to take its place. Pilot programs, they tend to change over time. You find gaps and you alter things as they go on before they become permanent. What are some of the key potential gaps or areas of concern that you strive to fill in this second pilot program before it becomes permanent?
Yeah, I mean, and I'd call this sort of second pilot program. I'm saying a bit of a nerdy answer in my speech, but I just can't continue the current one statutorily. So we're creating a new one that is essentially the same. But the new one, both the new one and the previous one have some policy challenges in it, in terms of really defining our roles and responsibilities between the sponsors and communities and the federal government. And I think that's something we want to tweak over the next little while to make sure those responsibilities are clearly defined. It's also part of a greater context that has nothing to do with the program itself, but it is the symptom of a challenge that we face in making sure that, whether it's the provincial nominee program, whether it's other provinces taking agency over different pilot projects, that we all clearly know our roles and responsibilities in making sure that newcomers are properly welcomed. So some tweaks I think that are very important, but the commitment today is to make this permanent, which wasn't the case in the past.
Great. So here comes the mic, and maybe this is a final question, I'm sure. I appreciate the collaboration here in this room that comes from Viviane and Marc and yourself and past Paul, and of course the Chamber of Commerce. My thought is, you must go to bed at night thinking of Sudbury. You must wake up on Monday morning and think of Sudbury.
I did last night.
You did? Is this why you chose Sudbury as for this announcement? Is this because you go out to Canada and say, look what Sudbury did? You can do it too.
I think I like long answers, but I think the answer is yes. But it's true. I mean, look at what you sometimes read in the public narrative is not what is lived on the ground. And I think there's a disjoint there that's unhealthy, because everyone I meet talks to me about how important immigration is, targeted immigration. Every time I go abroad, people tell me how they are copying the models that Canada has put into place. And that's not necessarily the reality you will see in certain elements of social media. And so to lift this up and to make sure that we are showing, and everyone is showing, business communities, industries, individuals themselves that are, just realizing the Canadian dream, is something that I think needs to be highlighted more. A plane landing safely never makes the front page of the newspaper. So it's not, success stories have to have that extra level of emotion to make sure that they do grab headlines. But I think this is something that is important to highlight, and the more we do this, and the more you do it, it gives more credibility than simply the federal government coming out and saying, look how great this is, because we often say that about stuff that perhaps is not that great. But these are great stories, and I think it shows when we have success stories, we need to continue them, because they are the future of this country.
Well, plus Viviane and I said he had no choice to come.
Could be exactly.
That too.
And this is Hugh from Post Media, and I just write happy stories, so I'm glad I put a smile on your face.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we have one question left on the line. Nous avons une dernière question sur la ligne.
Thank you. Merci. The question is from Marie Wolf from the Global Mail. Please go ahead. Your line is now open. La parole est à vous.
Thanks very much for taking my question. Just going back to the success stories you were talking about, could you clarify what the criteria are for choosing an immigrant to stay, to get permanent residence? Is it only based on employment, like matching it up to jobs, or are there other criteria? For example, a school might be closing and they need, a family might have children, you might keep that school alive. Could you just give us some of the boxes that are ticked? And equally, if you could just clarify, who is it that chooses? Is it the mayor, the municipality, or do local people get a say? Could you just talk us through the process, if you wouldn't mind?
Yeah, Mary, as always, you ask more detailed questions than I can give you adequate answers to. And we can give you after this press conference the detail of how sort of the waterfall of decision making occurs. But clearly, this program is designed to make sure that we are making. And this is, again, part of the larger criticism about temporary foreign work in this country, that people have that opportunity to get to permanent residence. The criteria, there are several criteria in someone getting to that permanent residence stage that obviously must be fulfilled. And they vary from program to program. And when it comes to the agency that I was mentioning earlier, making sure that we are, and this is the reason in part that we are taking a little bit more time to make sure that this is permanent, is that gets clearly defined as to who selects, what they are selecting, whether it's categories or individuals, and making sure that is absolutely clear as between the federal government and the sponsor or host cities. So we will get you the actual technical detail after this press conference on the questions that you asked, particularly the first one. Thank you.
Oh, thanks very much indeed. I hope my next question isn't too techy, but just on the rural pilot which you're introducing, the previous one was for small towns like, Sault Ste. Marie and so forth. But on the rural pilot, are you looking at really much smaller communities, even villages, people with only, 800 people living there? Would they be able to qualify, or is it still towns?
Mary, that was not, sorry, the line wasn't clear. We couldn't quite hear you.
Oh, I'm really sorry. I just wanted some more detail, if possible, on the rural pilot, whether it will be towns or will it be smaller rural communities who can apply and can qualify?
So we are looking to move this to what you qualify as a town and a community. It can be a subject of some debate, but we are looking to increase that from the 11 ones currently to what will be 15. I would use the general term community so that I don't insult anyone or create a sense of smallness or artificial largeness. And again, I'm from downtown Montreal, so I'll be judged no matter what answer I give to this. But again, largely 15 communities.
Thank you. If media have further questions, you're welcome to contact the media relations staff listed in the media advisory. Thank you to everyone who has joined us today. Merci. Si les médias ont d'autres questions, vous pouvez contacter le personnel des relations avec les médias indiqué dans l'avis des médias. Merci à tous ceux qui se sont joints à nous aujourd'hui. Bonne journée.
Thank you, everyone.